Om Sri Sai Ram. Jnana Vahini Chapter-02. Brahman is perceived when all traces of intention disappear. The direct perception of Brahman, a Paroksha Brahma Jnana, is the name given to the stage in which the aspirant is free from all doubt regarding improbability or impossibility and is certain that the two entities, the individual self or spirit Jiva and Brahman, were one or one and will ever be one. When this state is attained, aspirants will no longer suffer confusion. They won't mistake one thing for another or superimpose one thing on another. They won't mistake the rope for the snake. They will know that all along there was only one thing, the rope. Also, they won't suffer from superimposing the boundaries of individuality on the universal abhasa avarana. That is, they won't declare as they were wont to do previously, that the effulgence of Brahman is not in them. In the heart and center of every individual Jivi exists the Supreme Atma, Paramatma, minuter than the minutest molecule, huger than the hugest conceivable object, smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest. Therefore, spiritually wise people, jnanis, who have had a vision of the Atma in them, will never suffer sorrow. The Atma is there in all living things, in the ant as well as the elephant. The whole world is enveloped and sustained by this subtle Atma. Spiritual aspirants, sadhakas, have to direct their attention away from the external world and become insighted. They have to turn their vision toward the Atma. They must analyze the processes of the mind and discover for themselves the origin of all the modifications and agitations of the mind. By this means, every trace of intention and will has to disappear. Afterward, the only idea that will get fixed in the mind will be the idea of Brahman. The only feeling that will occupy the mind will be the feeling of bliss, which arises out of its establishment in the stage of being awareness, bliss, Sat Chit Ananda. Such spiritually wise people, jnanis, will be unaffected by joy or grief, for they will be truly immersed in the ocean of Atmic bliss, Atmananda, above and behind the reach of worldly things. The constant contemplation of the Atma and its glory is what is connoted by the phrases practice of Brahman, Brahma Abhyasa, and cultivation of spiritual wisdom, Jnana Abhyasa. Train the mind to dwell ever on God. The mind is influenced by the passion for objective pleasure and the delusion of ignorance with which it pursues, with amazing quickness, the fleeting objects of the world. So, again and again, it has to be led on toward higher ideals. Of course, this is difficult at first, but with persistent training, the mind can never be tamed. Then it will get fixed in the perpetual enjoyment of the Om Pranava. The mind can be trained by following the methods of quiet persuasion, promise of attractive inducements, practice of withdrawing the senses from the outer world, endurance of pain and travail, cultivation of sincerity and constancy, and acquisition of mental equipoise, sama, dhama, uparatha, uparati, titikaksha, shraddha and samadhana. The mind can be turned toward Brahman and the constant contemplation of Brahman by the study of the Upanishads. The adoption of regular prayer, sharing with others, the ecstasy of devotional singing, bhajan, and adherence to truth, very often with progress of meditation, dhyana, new desires and resolutions arise in the mind. But one need not despair. The mind can be broken provided one takes up the task in right earnest and follows a regular routine of training. The final result of this training is unlimited, unmodified bliss consciousness, nirvikalpa samadhi. This bliss consciousness gives full knowledge of Brahman, which in turn results in liberation from birth and death, moksha. The mind must be attuned to the contemplation of Brahman. One must strive to tread the path of Brahman and live in Brahman with Brahman. Instincts and impulses must be put down. Knowledge of the Atma, Atma Jnana, can be won only by the triple path of 1. Giving up impulses, vasanas, 2. Uprooting the mind, and 3. Analyzing experience in order to grasp the reality. Without these three, the knowledge of Atma will not dawn. The instincts and impulses prod the mind on toward the sensory world and bind the individual to joy and misery. So, the impulses must be put down. This can be achieved by means of discrimination, meditation on the Atma, inquiry, control of the senses, control of desires, renunciation, viveka, Atma Chintana, vicharana, sama, dhama, vairagya and other such disciplines. The mind is a bundle of impressions, vasanas. Verily, the mind is creation, Jagat itself. It is all the world for the individual. While in deep sleep, the mind does not function. So, creation is practically non-existence for the individual. Creation is born or enters into the consciousness and dies or disappears from the consciousness. According to the cognitive powers of the mind, therefore, when the mind is destroyed, the world is also destroyed and one is free, one is liberated, one attains moksha. Whoever succeeds in controlling the consciousness chitta can have a vision of the Atma. Consciousness is the grown-up tree, while the seed is the ego. The feeling of I, when the seed I is cast aside, all the activities of the consciousness also vanish automatically. The spiritual aspirant who is earnest for these results has to be ever vigilant. At any moment, the senses might regain the lost mastery and enslave the individual. The aspirant might lose much of the ground already gained. That is why spiritual aspirants are warned away from attachment to the world. Be ever and always immersed in the search for truth. Don't waste time in the multiplication and satisfaction of wants and desires. One source of pleasure craves another source as a corollary. Thus, the mind seeks again and again to acquire the objects it has given up. So, don't yield to the vagaries of the mind. Turn back, even forcibly, from sensory attachment. Why? Even prayer can't be done according to the mind's vagaries. One has to stick to the same place and time. The Atma itself will sustain such spiritual aspirants and give them strength and steadiness. The one who has subdued the mind will be the same in good times and bad. grief and joy are but aberrations of the mind. It is only when the mind is associated with the senses and the body that it is affected and agitated and modified. When one takes in an intoxicant, one is not aware of pain, right? How does this happen? The mind is then detached from the body. So, it is not bothered by physical pain or discomfort. Similarly, spiritually wise people, jnanis, have immersed their minds in the Atma. They can establish mental peace and quiet by disciplining the mind. Spiritually wise people get full bliss from their own Atma. They don't seek it anywhere outside themselves. In fact, they will have no desire or pain or plan to find joy in anything external. They are satisfied with the inner joy they get. The greatness of spiritually wise people is beyond description, even behind your imagination. The sacred texts, Shrutis, proclaim the one who has known Brahman becomes Brahman itself. The one who has attained the Brahman principle has become the highest. Brahmaiva with Brahmaiva bhavati, Brahmaiva with Paramam apannati. All bubbles are but the same water. So also, all the multiplicity of name and form, all this created world are but the same Brahman. This is the fixed conviction of the spiritually wise jnani, nay, their genuine experience. As all rivers flow into the sea and get lost, so also all desires get lost in the effulgent consciousness of the realized soul. That is what is termed direct vision of the Atma, Atma Sakshatkara. The Atma has no death, right? It is not born and it is unaffected by the sixfold process of change. It is birthless, Aja, without old age, Ajara, without death, Amara, and without decline and extinction, Avinasha. These processes are for the evanescent body. They are the sixfold processes of change. They mean being born, existing, growing, getting old, declining, and lastly dying. The Atma has no such modification. It is stable, unshakable, fixed, the witness of all change in space and time. It is unaffected by transformation like the water drop on the lotus leaf. Liberation from the tentacles of the mind can be obtained by the acquisition of the knowledge of the absolute Brahma Jnana. This type of liberation is the genuine self-rule, Swarajya. This is genuine moksha. Whoever grasps the reality behind all this passing show will be untroubled by instinct or impulse or any other urge. They will be the master of the real wisdom. The robber who has robbed us of the precious gem of Atma is no other than the mind. So, the gem can be regained by catching, threatening, and punishing the robber. The possessor of that gem is immediately honored by being installed as Brahman. Om Sri Sai Ram.